I'm Stephanie Howe, co-host of Get Inspired and Innovate, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Sheila Akbar, the president and COO of Signet Education. This is an awesome conversation about addressing the challenges of getting into college. Everything from creating a decision-making process to the pressures to make good choices. You are going to absolutely love this talk. Thanks for listening. And by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you left a review for the podcast. You can do this by going to the many different platforms I'm on, or you can just go to my website at stephenmiletto.com/reviews and left a review there. Thanks for doing that. And by the way, do you know someone who hasn't listened to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12? Well, it'd be so cool if you reached out to them, whether they're a family member, a friend, a colleague, and just said, hey, have you listened to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12? Well, you should, and here's the link. Thanks for doing that. You're awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Sheila Akbar joined the Signet team in the summer of 2010, bringing with her a wealth of experience teaching SAT, ACT, GRE, literature, and composition in both one-on-one and classroom settings. Sheila loves both teaching and learning and finds nothing more rewarding than working closely with students to overcome the challenges they face. After graduating from Harvard in 2002, Sheila spent 2 years working in financial services before continuing her academic career, which culminated into 2 doctorates. She brings her significant business and academic experience to bear on her current role at Signet. Her skills include speaking to every client to craft a tailored solution for their needs, managing the administrative team, and providing educational thought leadership for the company. Sheila holds a bachelor's degree and master's degree from Harvard University and 2 doctoral degrees from Indiana University. Sheila, thanks for joining me today. Great to have you on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Stephen, for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you on. And Sheila, I got to ask you this, all right? How did you go from being a pre-med, a Harvard pre-med, to a scholar of early modern love poetry to an educational entrepreneur? Because that's an interesting shift that happens right there.
It's an interesting trajectory, and I feel like if I had an easy answer, I could finally satisfy my parents. They're still wondering about all of this.
That's funny.
And I think that actually has a lot to do with this sort of windy path that I've taken. It is kind of a long story, but I'm going to do my best to condense it for you. Basically, I grew up in a small town in Michigan, raised in a family of immigrants where education was the thing that mattered. They didn't really care about anything else going on in my life as long as my grades were perfect. And there were really clear expectations that I would become a doctor. My father is a doctor. My older brother is a doctor. It was just the path.
No pressure there.
And, I think it's a beautiful profession. I have always loved math and science. So I was like, yeah, this works for me. I can do this. I know they're kind of forcing me, but I also have my own reasons. And then, I pursued that path to the best of my ability. And then at some point in college, I was like, maybe I should listen to that little voice that's telling me this is not what you really want to do with your life. Thankfully, I listened to that voice before I took the MCAT, but not quickly enough that I, hadn't already done all of my pre-med requirements and done all that stuff. But the problem at that point was when I decided to listen to myself and admit medicine was not for me, I really had no idea what was for me or how to go about figuring that out. And this was at a time where Wall Street was just hungry for bodies. They didn't care what you studied, what your grades were. They just wanted Ivy League people. And I kind of got caught up in that with, 70% of my graduating class. So I went to work on Wall Street, very quickly realized it was not fulfilling to me. And then fell again into this period of what do I do? How do I figure this out? And all the while I had been studying poetry because it was something that I enjoyed as a high schooler. I actually still have the book on my desk here.
Very nice.
Listeners, you can't see it, but I'm holding it up. This is the book somebody gave me when I was 16, and it changed sort of the trajectory of my life. And while I was sort of struggling with this question of what do I want to do with myself, I just kept going back to poetry and, finding a lot of solace there, finding prompts for reflection in that poetry. And then one day the light bulb went off. Oh, maybe I should study poetry. This is the thing that has been with me the whole time. I keep coming back to it. So after a few sort of missteps into maybe architecture grad school or film school or, lots of different things that I thought about doing, I decided to go back into academia and work on poetry. And while I was pursuing that course, which was a long road, I needed to pay some bills, and grad school does not pay very well. So I started tutoring on the side. I had family friends approaching me to work with their kids on the SAT or on their college applications because they had seen that I had been successful in those areas. And then I started working with Kaplan and a couple of other, tutoring companies. And then in 2010, I moved back to Boston to write my dissertation using the wonderful libraries at Harvard. And my friend Jay, who's a friend of mine from college, had already started Signet 5 years earlier. And I just was like, all right, I'm going to work with you now. And it, has become a wonderful partnership. He's such a good friend. And I went from being a tutor to designing our curricula, to training other tutors, to hiring all of our tutors, to, expanding our business into different areas. And so my role has just continued to sort of snowball there. And now I run the show. Jay's still very much involved and we're very much partners, but, it's pretty clear that I'm in charge. Which I like. And so that's kind of the journey. And looking back now, I don't see a series of failures or a series of existential crises, which is how it felt at the time. Now I see that I'm able to draw on all the skills and the networks that I built through trying all of those things. And now I've found the thing that really does kind of push all the buttons and really make me light up.
That's cool. And yeah, I wouldn't see it as failure either, because I think it's what we do as human beings the best is when we are able to figure out what it is that really makes the lights go on. The whole thing where you kind of go, hey, that's really what I want to do. And that's cool.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Right. And I went through this journey of thinking that I had failed and, my parents being very stressed out, like what's going to happen. But now I see it as, this is actually the process. This is how you find what you love. You've got to try a lot of things. You've got to be unafraid of quote unquote failure. And you've got to push through and seek those things that are meaningful to you. And then it will kind of all come together.
That's cool. That's so cool. Thanks for sharing that. Because I think that's what's, one of the things that's really neat about that story is that we can figure things out as we're doing it. It's kind of like building the plane while it's flying.
Yeah, while it's flying. Yeah,
I think
exactly.
It's cool. So awesome. Sheila, now let's talk about Signet Education. What's its purpose and what's its why? What's it exist for?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked me the story about kind of how I got to where I am, because that really is the purpose of Signet too. And I think it's why, my role at Signet has grown over the years. Jay and I have very similar stories in that he, I think, went to Harvard as a physics major and came out with a degree in comparative religion and then became a serial entrepreneur. So that experience, that lived experience really influences everything we do at Signet. We really see our mission as helping teenagers find their own path, right? And we support them with the reflection skills, a partner, and then, of course, the knowledge, the other services that might be needed along that path. But the first thing we got to do is help them figure out what is it that you want to do and what's your vision, what's meaningful to you, and where might that lead you? And then how do you experiment with that to figure out if that's right? So it's kind of a mix of everything. We call it just mentorship, but it does come in different flavors. So we do test preparation and academic tutoring. We do college admissions counseling, graduate admissions counseling. There's a little career counseling mixed in there, but I wouldn't say that's one of our specialties. But the thing that really ties it all together is a service that we call academic coaching, and that's really where we get to work with students on figuring out their vision for the future, what might be standing in the way of that, and how they want to make incremental changes to get closer to that inspiring vision of the life they want to lead.
That is really cool. I appreciate you taking time to explain all that, and it's awesome. So this is cool. So we fit well. We got a good conversation going here because I've got a lot of listeners that are looking for assistance and help and thoughts about what they do at next level. So and how to get to that next level. So cool stuff. So let me just start. I mean, what's the secret to getting into the college of your dreams? I mean, what would you talk with somebody about?
Well, I think we have to start by defining all of those terms, right? And one of the most important one of those terms is the you in that, right? Like nice. Who is the student that we're talking about and what is specific to them that we need to keep in mind, right? And then once you understand what the student needs and wants, you can start thinking about colleges that might meet those needs and desires. And then you can start thinking about like, okay, what's the secret now? How do we tell your story so that the college really understands you are exactly what they're looking for and they are exactly what you're looking for? So if I had to kind of boil down it to a secret, it's really about authenticity. And I know people are so tired of hearing, oh, just be yourself, you'll be fine. And it's not just, go in with your best instincts, but it is really about being true to yourself, right? Not trying to speak like you think a Princeton student is going to speak, or not trying to say you're interested in things that you think a Georgia Tech student would be interested in if you're not truly interested in those things. It really starts with you knowing what's meaningful to you and interesting to you, and then looking for those resources and opportunities at the colleges. So I don't know if any of your listeners are old enough to remember G.I. Joe, but G.I. Joe always ended the cartoon with a little snippet about how knowing is half the battle. I really feel like in the college process, that is so true. Knowing yourself, knowing what the college has to offer, and deciding on which colleges to apply to first, that's actually half the battle. If you get that match right and you can articulate why you're a fit with this college and vice versa, you're going to be more successful, not only in the application process, but in the college and in whatever comes after college. So that's where we really spend a lot of time with students. A lot of families think they can show up, September or October of senior year and say, okay, we're ready to start the college process. And yes, true. We can write essays, you can fill out the forms, you can get that done. But it's much more valuable to start with a student earlier, maybe sophomore year or the beginning of junior year, to really dig into those, important, almost intangible things of, what's meaningful to you? Why do you like being on the yearbook? Or why do you have the friends that you have? And what does that say about your values? And how can we seek that out in the kind of college environment that you will eventually apply to? And that work takes time because teenagers are usually never asked for their thoughts, and certainly not on those things. So it takes a while to build that muscle.
That's awesome. And by the way, it's also awesome that you use G.I. Joe as a reference. So I love that. Because I remember
very rarely will I turn to military metaphors, but G.I. Joe, that
was awesome because I remember that at the end of those shows, they make this, this reference and make some sort of analogy to whatever was going on in the story there. That was awesome. I like that. Very cool. So let's talk about, what you just talked about and connect it with the idea of getting teenagers to develop a vision for the future. I mean, could you kind of talk about this? Because I understand, I'm the father of two sons who are both engineers now and gone to universities and working in a job, and they're these engineers. I'm the history person. That would be my wife's influence, who is the math person right there. Okay. As they are so to remind me as from time to time I say things like, "Hey, you know, I can help you with math." Ah, yeah, right. Anyway, my point is that having gone through those stages, you know, and they're looking at different things, and you know, they got friends talking to them, and they run into some kids who have no clue whatsoever, and even they went to college with them, you know, who have no clue whatsoever, and you know, graduate and still not thinking about it. And so it's important to develop that vision for the future. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I think it's just so crucial. I think especially in today's society, we have this hyper focus on getting into a quote unquote good college, as if that alone is going to set the stage for that person's success in life, how happy they are, what kind of relationships they're going to enter into in their life. It has nothing to do with those things, right? That kind of life success is so much bigger than just where you go to college, right? And you'll meet people who go to the, you know, quote unquote best colleges who are miserable, and people who maybe never even went to college who have this beautiful, fulfilling life, right? So it really has very little to do with college. I think it has everything to do with your mindset. And that hyper focus on, okay, to get into this college, I have to take this many AP classes and lead this many clubs and, you know, check all these boxes, robs a growing, developing human of the opportunity to think for themselves and learn how to solve problems for themselves and decide what they want and really just take ownership over their life, right? We're seeing this sort of crisis of, you know, mental health, you know, people not being satisfied with what's out there in terms of job opportunities or whatever. But also parents keep telling me, like, when is my kid going to be independent? Right. And these things are, it's not, for me, it's not a coincidence that they are all kind of coming to a head at the same time. Because as parents, of course, we want to protect our kids and set them up for success and do as much as we can for them. But if we do too much, we kind of almost, and I'm not a psychologist, so, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but it's almost like you're stunting their growth. If your child never experiences disappointment or struggle or, you know, any of those things that are hard, if they never have to work hard for something, well, it's going to be hard for them to face that reality of being an independent adult where, you know, life is hard and there's struggle all around. If they're never asked to think for themselves, then, you know, when they're off in college and they're presented with a situation, whether it's an academic situation or a social situation, can you really trust them to make their own decisions? You know, you're going to have to, but did you give them a chance to practice this when it was safe to practice it before? So I think a lot of that is I forget where I was going, but you get my point that, that we have to allow children to start to develop these skills while they're still at home, because we can't expect them to just figure it out or not figure it out later on, right? So in terms of developing a vision for their future, you know, teenagers are at a developmental stage where, like, lots of things are very interesting and their minds are going to change all the time. You know, one day they want to be a veterinarian and the next day they want to be a, you know, movie star, right? Two totally unrelated things. And that's fine. Actually, we have to embrace that. And one of the things I tell parents a lot, and I have to say, teenagers are very excited about doing this work with someone who is not their parent. It's more the parents that need to believe, like, okay, it's okay for them to explore some stuff and have a mentor who's going to be a guardrail for them. But one of the things I always tell parents is, you know, I get them to reflect on their own story, which is usually something like mine, where we try a bunch of different things until we find the thing we fall into. And they see it is not a linear path. And then I ask them, well, why do you expect your son or daughter or whatever to go on a linear path themselves? Right? The world has only gotten more complicated since, you know, their generation went to college and went to work. There's so many new possibilities. Of course, it's not going to be a linear path. Right. And the key is you have to allow your teenager to figure out that path for themselves. You can support them. You can guide them. You can be a sounding board, but you cannot define that path for them and you can't walk it for them. right? So that's the note to parents. But in terms of actually working with teenagers to develop a vision for their future, sometimes very hard. I think even for me at, 45 years old, it's very hard for me to think about, okay, what is my life going to look like in 10 years, right? For a teenager, it's that much harder, right? They have no idea what adult life looks like. They don't know what college looks like. They don't know what career looks like. So often we start small. It might be in the next semester. What do you want to see happen? What do you want to avoid happening? Right. And oftentimes we're working with students who have learning differences or maybe executive function challenges. So it might be something simple like, I want to make it to school on time every day for the next semester. Or I don't want to miss a single assignment. I don't want to turn a single assignment in late all next semester. Right. And it's got to be something motivating to them. Those things may not be that motivating to them. So, we do a lot of work to figure out, okay, what do you think about your life right now? Where are you dissatisfied? Where could things be better? And let's choose one of those areas to focus on and make some small changes and help you see that if you focus on something, you can affect change in your own life. And that's going to be kind of the start of a snowball effect if we can take on harder things and we can get to those other places. And, a student's performance in school is not separate from their feelings about their life or their friends or how much sleep they're getting or how well they're eating, things like that. So we don't pretend that their academic performance is happening in a vacuum. And I think acknowledging that for a teenager and asking them, what do you wish were different? Things that we actually can change is very empowering for them. And then they get a taste of, oh, wait, I get to decide what I want to do with this time. I get to decide what my life is going to look like. And then we can start to build that out. Okay, in the next year, what do you want to avoid or what do you want to change or what do you want to achieve? The next 3 years, like if we're working with a sophomore, what do we want to say? What do you want to be able to say when you look back at your high school years? What do you want to remember most? What don't you want to miss out on? What don't you want to regret? And then we can start to think about college and career. So it starts small, but it snowballs from there.
That's so cool. Cause I think about things that, I really wish I had somebody who kind of given me some guidance. Cause, now I got some from my parents and kudos to them because they had this whole focus on, basically they weren't focused on me becoming a doctor. They were focused on me. You're going to college. I mean, I had that from, very beginning stages of, once I started understanding what they're talking about. But because they had both they had not gone to 4-year institutions. They had gone to, my father had gotten different types of completions of certificates and licensures from what are called, at that time, were called community colleges. And my mother was an RN. And so she'd gone to like a 2-year nursing school or something like that. And the point is that, so they really didn't know how to think about it, and they got divorced. And so I got these messages from two different sides of the county. And what's interesting about it is that I say this because at some point I thought, I'd like to be a veterinarian. And so my dad got me a summer job with a friend of his who was a veterinarian. And so I got, by the way, it was unpaid. I call it a job. But I discovered something about the thought about being a veterinarian. The pets die sometimes. And I went, oh, dude, and I can't do this. I got, I cry at Dumbo and I cry at Bambi. And things like that. I get, and a couple happened that summer because I was the guy who cleaned up things and stuff like this.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that taught me a huge lesson. And at one point I thought I love superhero comics, especially Spider-Man and Batman. And I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm going to be a cartoon artist, right? And I was working on all this sort of stuff, but I didn't want to take, take classes and listen to other people. No, man, and that went the other direction, but it was fun thinking about it at the time. And and then somewhere in the back of my mind, it was always, by the way, this is my fandom for G.I. Joe. I'm a former officer in the Army, and that's one of my goals was to become an Army officer. And but it started off as an Air Force officer, and this is where I tell this part of the story because what I wanted to do was I was thinking I want to fly jets in the Air Force, and went to air shows and all kinds of stuff like this. And then someone said to me, Steve, you don't like roller coasters, do you?
Oh
You know, you got a point there.
no. Yeah.
And so the officer thing becomes in the Army ground, you know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but I say all that because, you know, I had friends who never in a million years had any thoughts or changes to what they were doing. That's why I love what you did. It's like, you know, it's like this, there's different ideas, and of course there's different voices that come to you too. And I don't mean made up voices. I mean the voices of relatives, voices of best friends, voices of, you know, parents, and stuff like this, or even siblings who go, "What are you, nuts?" You know, so,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's thanks for talking about that, because that's so cool. Yeah, one of the things that I got to talk about that I think is neat, that I know that you can speak on, is in getting into college as well as throughout life, there's a need to understand how we navigate big decisions, and it's important to have some sort of values-based framework. Can you go into this just a little bit? Because I think a lot of times, you know, some people choose their livelihood based upon, you know, like they do groceries. Ooh, I'd like that. Or no, that candy bar looks better, and I didn't even come here to buy the candy bar. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And before I answer that, I actually love that you shared your story, because it's such a great example of how it's important to think about the reality of the day to day of any of these jobs that you might want to be considering. And sometimes you're gonna learn it by doing, like your internship or whatever it was at the vet's office, or you're gonna realize it because of somebody else who has some other exposure to that field, who can give you some insight into whether it would be a fit for you, like your friend who said you don't like roller coasters, or reminded you that you didn't like roller coasters. So that's just so great. And I feel like those are the kinds of stories that we need to share with our kids more, because otherwise they grow up thinking, oh, I have to have this all figured out and nobody's going to guide me, and my parents never struggled with this and they can't possibly understand, right? But the thing is, we all know this. Right? We've all experienced some form of this. And the more we can share that and be vulnerable about it, I think the less pressure our teenagers will put on themselves, because that's really hurting them right now. So in terms of a decision framework, what we do at Signet, in addition to helping a student develop a meaningful vision for their future, we want to underpin that vision with certain personal values. And, they're not my values. I don't have an agenda when I'm doing this with the student. I really want to understand what's meaningful to them. And then we'll show them how those values can help them make decisions about what classes to take, what college to go to, whether to date this person or not, whether this job is going to be a fit for me or anything like that, right? And it usually starts with asking a student, like, what do they really care about? How do they really want to make sure they're spending their time? And they might start by saying, oh, yeah, I care about my good grades and whatever. But then you really get down to it and they really care about their dog, or they care about playing this particular video game because they have a group of friends that they play with that are just the most meaningful group of friends to them. They can talk to them about anything, whatever. You start digging into that and you get to say things like, oh, so like, loyalty is something that's really important to you, or caring for others is really important to you. And they've never thought about it that way. But sometimes you just reflect it back to them and they're like, yeah, I guess so. Because, this other thing happened and the role that I took in this situation was trying to take care of other people. That's my first priority, right? So sometimes that works. Another thing that we do is we just give them a list of values. Right? Like literally words on a page, hundreds of words. And we say, look at these and, mark out anything that stands out to you that feels like a value you want to have. And they might start with 10 or 12 and we're going to get them down to hopefully 4 or 5. But, I think the real value in that exercise is just getting them to reflect. And then once you get there and you can get, a crystallized set of values, then that really becomes something that they can rely on as they move forward. And those values may shift as they get more experience, grow older, certain things change. But now they know how to define their values. They know that they can rely on their values to understand whether, a certain decision or a certain job is a good fit for them. And that sort of the teach a man to fish kind of thing. They can take with them their whole life. A lot of companies have values, and Signet, of course, has values as well, but we really use these as a decision framework. When we're hiring tutors, we go through our values and we say, tell me about a time that you lived up to this value or you demonstrated this value in your life. And if they can't think of anything, they're probably not a good fit for us. And vice versa, we're not going to be a good fit for them. So, we use those values in our hiring, in our training, in our promoting. We even use those values when we're thinking about working with a client. Does this client understand that these are our values when we're working with their student, right? And those values are care deeply, collaborate, grow, inspire confidence, and teach students, not subjects. There's nothing in there about a perfect score on the SAT or a 4.0 GPA. And a parent really has to understand that our number one priority is the sort of holistic health of this student, right? And we're not going to be qualified to solve all the problems that they may be facing, but certainly we're going to introduce them to people because we think mental health is extremely important. We think physical health is extremely important. If we see they're struggling with these things, and this is the reason we can't move this grade forward, or we can't, decide on a college or something, we're going to let the family know. And if we have a sense when we're starting to talk to a family about possibly working with us, if we have a sense that they are not on board with those values, they're not going to let us live those values, then we will try to introduce them to somebody else that we think is a better fit for them.
That's so cool because that decision making is so important, and and sometimes they can get their hopes set on one thing, and there's decision makers on the other end, and it could be that you actually might even be a better fit for something else. I one time was talking to people in an ACT program, and they were explaining to me about some people. They choose, somebody's implanted a reason why they choose something that their actual their performance on different things kind of lend to. It's kind of like wanting to be an accountant, but are your math scores?
Being bad at math.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And
and we do that all the time. We convince ourselves, this is the thing I want. I'm going to go do. I mean, like your dream of becoming an Air Force pilot, right?
Right. Exactly. Yes. And only until recently, in the last bunch of years, did I started, my wife and I said, I looked at her and I said, our sons do this all the time. And we see, like 12-year-olds on these roller coasters because we're members of a theme park that's up here in Georgia, and it's like, dadgummit, I'm gonna overcome this fear, and so I rode this one called Goliath, which is this massive roller coaster that goes up and down and all through the park, and I was like, well, that was pretty good. I said, but it messed me up for the rest of the day, kind of sort of thing. I was kind of okay, but so the next time we went back, I said, all right, now it's time to try, because I like comic books, right? So at that theme park, they have Batman and Superman, and I was like, all right, let's start with Batman, and then after that, came back and did Superman, and all of that was good. It's like now, at the age that I'm at now I start riding roller coasters. Good stuff. A little late for that pilot thing, but back in those days, it's like, yes, that was a good point, because that was a friend who had tried to get me to go on these roller coasters when we went to this park as family. So I was like, yeah, it ain't happening. So, but it's funny how it is important to have thoughts about what it is you like, what it is you don't like, and is this real? Or did somebody actually plant this seed in your brain that you really don't know why you're thinking about it? I love that because that moves away from all kinds of stuff. Did you ever see a TV show called American Housewife? It's not on anymore, but it had about a 5-year run or something like that. And there was a kid on the show who he was in high school and he's trying to make it. I think when the show first started, he was in middle school and he's going into high school and he's all about trying to get accepted to Harvard. All right. So your place, right. And he's like, and what's cool is that there were a lot of stuff that they introduced that he said that actually is real about families doing things like this. And one of the things that he settled on was that he had to find something unique that other guys his age bracket and so forth may not be thinking about. And so he started doing ballet. And
interesting.
Because he had a couple other things that were failed, and then it was just kind of interesting. And because you saw this process over these seasons, and it's interesting what you're talking about. So, by the way, we're not sponsored by the company that produced that show or anything like that. So I just thought I'd say that. But you had me thinking about that because the character he literally was going after one thing after another, and finally
just trying all the unique things. I mean, that is true. It's important to be able to stand out, but it should be with something authentic. And hopefully that fictional character actually found a bunch of things that he liked that he never thought he would.
What's cool is he did. He found that he was good at the help because he needed to volunteer. We were talking about stuff like that. So he discovered that he only started with the helpline because he was being very pragmatic about needing to do these stuff, and then he discovered he was good at it, and as well as the ballet. So it did happen. I thought that was cool of the writers to actually find something instead of just being that way. But enough about that, because like I said, I'm not sponsored by these shows. But if anybody's from those studios, I'd be happy.
Willing to consider a sponsorship.
Exactly.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about, because we've mentioned about parents, and parents have this pressure on them because they really want their kid to do well, and they would hate for their kid to be, not to mention any companies, but the idea that they go off and they do all this stuff, just like kind of like your parents were probably a little freaked out when they're like, what? And how can we, so they have this pressure that, we want you to do well. How can we help you do well? And so some of them go a little too over the deep end. And some of them don't even know where to start and do stuff like this. So what role can employers play in taking the pressure off of working parents?
Sure. Yeah. And I always like to answer this question with first, I wish our government would play a bigger role in doing this, because I think part of the problem stems from the way we think about education. And it's not just in this country. It's, just generally how we think about education as you got to know math. You need some history facts. You need to know how to write. But nobody ever teaches you how to be a grown up, how to think for yourself. And some kids kind of pick it up as they go through, and other kids don't. And there are just sort of life skills and organizational skills and reflection skills that I think could be easily integrated into some of the curriculum that we have. But, that's a whole other can of worms. When it comes to employers, especially with, the great resignation or reshuffle, however you want to call it, that's happened with COVID, employers are always looking for ways to attract and retain really good talent. And working parents have skills that are different from people without children, right? We know how to multitask. We know how to think ahead. We can be creative under serious restraints. Nothing like having to parent a child through a pandemic to make you the ultimate problem solver, right? What I talk with employers about a lot is expanding the way they support their working parents from just providing subsidized childcare to things that can help parents as their kids get older, because the job doesn't end when your kid starts kindergarten. Maybe the private daycare or preschool stops and you can take advantage of public school systems, but there's still a lot that working parents have to balance. And if something is stressing them out about their child's mental health, their performance in school, behavioral problems, that they're not going to be fully present at work. And beyond that, I also always tell employers this: when we look at our website, traffic, the vast majority of that traffic is happening between the hours of 9 to 5 on Eastern time, where we are located, and from a desktop computer.
Wow.
So that's not happening on a lunch break or a smoke break or, whatever. That's happening while they are sitting at their desk,
right.
We're supposedly doing work. And that just shows you that, there is no way to separate these things. If a parent has a child with a problem, that's going to take priority in their life, whatever their job is. So one of the things that we suggest to employers is having mental health support available, not just for the parents, but for the kids, through whatever programs the employer offers, but also having some sort of educational guidance mixed in there, right? Whether it's access to an expert like me, a resource list of helpful blogs or books or what have you. I know many companies have actually contracted with places that offer college consulting. And so there are a variety of ways that employers can help their parents navigate all of these challenges. And I think it's really a very interesting and progressive way to think about how we can move forward as a society after this huge traumatic event. And I say after, it's of course not completely over, but we really need to think about taking care of people in a different way. And education, I think, has always sort of been in the background. You feel like, oh, someone else is taking care of that. But we see more and more that it is the main concern of parents, who are working, and they're just trying to balance all of these things.
It's so interesting and powerful because, it's funny. I tell my wife all the time that I now understand, what my dad was worried about when, you take off, because in those days, when I took off to go back to school, he didn't know where I was going. There's no way of tracking me. I mean, some of these parents today, they have apps that tell them where the phone's going, and it's so they think that's where their kid's going, although the kid may have left the phone with a friend, or something like this. But
they're sneaky. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But the point is that, you hope that at some point the worry goes, well, it doesn't. What happens? You just have different stages. So it's interesting because it's the same thing with when children are thinking about what they're going to choose and what they're going to work on and what decisions they're going to make. Some of them think that it comes to an end at some point. It doesn't. It doesn't either. And you kind of you connect it with all that. And so it's important to have thoughts about having made these decisions, because if it turns out that you need to change, okay, I'm going this way, but now I'm going to go that way, and that you're okay with it because you've got some skills in understanding how to navigate and stuff like this. I think that's cool.
Yeah. And, beyond just having support for the children in doing those things, I think supporting parents around that is really important too. Actually, we're really great friends with a company that's based in Georgia called Impact Parents, and they are a parent coaching company, and the work they do is amazing. Really helping parents become what they say is champions for their children, as opposed to coordinators or directors, right? And it's a really amazing journey that a parent can go on that, really teaches you how to trust your child and how to, set up a system so that you can trust your child to make those decisions, but also just bring some sanity into a parent's life and supports them. So that would be a place I would encourage people to check out too. It's impactparents.com. They're great.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. All right. So, we talked about working parents. One of the things that I got to do is that, there's some stuff going on about anxiety and so forth and depression among teens. I mean, literally, what do you think's happening in our schools that is leading to this epidemic of anxiety and depression among teens, and especially girls?
Yeah. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not the expert on this, but I can tell you what I'm seeing from my work and the families that we work with. I think probably 60 to 70% of them are facing some kind of mental health crisis with their children right now. So we've seen that grow just tremendously over the course of the pandemic, but also over the course of the last 12 years I've been with Signet. You hear about it more and more. And I think there are two main things that are contributing to this as it relates to academics. And one is uncertainty, right? We've just had this period of uncertainty that was unlike any other that this generation has ever seen, where school was just canceled and then school was remote. People didn't know how to do that. And it was like, what is happening to grades, right? And all of these people were like, okay, so it's going to be pass fail for this year. And I didn't do any work. I didn't actually learn anything, but that's okay because my grades are, not going to be impacted by that. But what about my extracurriculars? Like I love playing sports, or I was on track to being the president of this club, and now that club no longer exists. So like, what do I do with that? And a lot of people worried about what was the impact on their college applications. But also there's this like worry of like, wait, I didn't learn any math last year. How am I supposed to go into AB calculus this year? I don't know this stuff, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think as humans, we tend to blame ourselves first before blaming a system or somebody else. And I think a lot of kids have internalized, oh, everybody else seems fine with this math, this year of math that we missed. So it must be me, right? Or I just have to work harder. And then they don't know how hard is hard enough. And so then they're just burning the candle at both ends. They're not getting any rest. They're not doing anything that actually brings them joy. And they're totally burnt out. So I think uncertainty is a big piece of it. And then the other piece of it is comparison, which I was a little bit alluding to there. They see either their peers in their immediate circle being fine with some things that they're not fine with, or they hear about, that kid who got into all of the Ivy League schools, or that person who started an NGO, or this person who started a business and, sold it for however many millions of dollars before they even graduated high school. I always tell people there is a reason you're hearing about it because it is so rare. Right? It was such a big deal and so rare that newspapers felt they had to cover it, right? Or news outlets felt they had to cover it. That is not the norm. That is absolutely not the norm. And giving students like an actual picture of what an average student looks like, or a baseline level of achievement kind of looks like, can really help them put things in perspective. And it's one of the things that we're always trying to do with helping them develop a vision for their future. What that really is giving them permission to define success for themselves, right? Success is not an admission to this college or this GPA or this SAT score. It is a balanced life where you can live, I don't know, in Colorado in the mountains and do this thing that you love to do all the time. And it may have nothing to do with the career you have or how much money you make or what college you went to, right? And if we can keep them focused on that, then they have their own definition of success and they don't need to worry about what other people are doing, right? Well, that's one of the ways that we're trying to help students kind of find their footing with all of this. And I think it's exacerbated with women because there's so many more pressures telling them they're not good enough. Just any age woman is told that. However, hundreds of times a day by the images we see, by, the way people talk to us, the fact that there is a wage gap, all of these things, women are always told that they're not enough. And that is certainly present for teenage girls as well. But then there are academic things as well. A lot of girls grow up believing girls don't do math or computer science or engineering. And that is a persistent myth that can really hurt a girl's self-esteem, especially if she really likes those things or sees herself as talented in those areas. So there's a lot that's just sort of systemic in the language, in the water of our society that is very hard for teenage girls to bolster themselves against because it's just so ubiquitous.
That's a great talk right there. That's, it's interesting because, and to me, it all kind of comes down to, because first of all, there's all this stuff with social media where we're more connected than ever before, but we're also really not really connected to those people.
Right.
And so I just can't imagine being a teen right now walking around with a phone and thinking that you got to respond to all these things that are going on. And then, in the end, are these people really in your world? And especially, some of those platforms, people lie about their status and things like this. And
of course. Yeah. And it's all curated. It's not real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, and so those types of pressures. And then on top of that, the idea that, we'll just kind of go back to what I said about, when I wanted to be a comic book artist. All right. And today, if I said that, people immediately probably start thinking about the movies and things like this. And, in those days, there may have been one or two superhero movies, but they really stayed away from them because they couldn't make the special effects work.
Right.
And so nobody's thinking, oh, you're going to go into special effects. So they're thinking about the comic book themselves. Well, what we found out a bunch of years later when the owner of Marvel Comics, had made all these deals with these movie companies was that he was actually, the company was almost dead and buried, and financially and all kinds of stuff, and they saved him. And it's funny because lots of people in those days, when I said that, they said, they don't make much money, do they? That was the first thing they said to me. And it's like, dude, it's just cool, and it's like, and yeah, that, and
no, I feel you. My husband's an artist.
nice.
And he grew up, we have comic book art all over our house because he grew up loving very specific comic book artists. And yeah, I think he was told that a lot too. And so he actually ended up working in film for a very long time because that's where there was more money. And only recently at 43 years old did he decide to go back to school and do an MFA and actually study art, the art that he was really passionate about. So I commend him for that because that was a big pivot, but it's really hard to follow your dreams. It's really hard.
It is. And I can see how that pressure would be on you from all kinds of different voices today, where, at least I had the relatives and the friend voices and, and a few other places. But, today, my goodness, man, if they could be talking online and someone who they never in a million years, they don't even know if that person's real. It could be a bot for all they know that someone's created.
Yeah.
And anyway, just I appreciate you talking about that. Any thoughts about supporting teens around mental health issues that come from the academics and the academic pressures?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody should have a therapist, whether you feel like you have a mental health issue or not. I think therapy is really wonderful and amazing. So, beyond actually getting support from a mental health professional, I think there's a lot that people can do to help students feel more successful. And for us at Signet, it starts with helping them create a definition of success for themselves, right? It may not be an A in every class. Maybe some classes you're just aiming for the B or the B plus, and that's fine, right? Given whatever your goals are. So taking a realistic view on what's achievable, right? Really understanding what kind of workload you're going to have and having a good system for managing that workload can go, tremendous lengths to helping a student feel calm and like they have it under control. We do a lot of executive function support. So helping students manage their time more effectively, set priorities, take big assignments or tests and break them into smaller kind of manageable pieces so you can study a little at the time. One of the first things that we ever did in this sort of space, when we used to call this organizational coaching and study skills, is helping students understand what studying looks like. For so many of them, it's like, I'm just going to highlight every line in this book.
Exactly.
Well, that's not actually studying, right? And they don't know, I think I said this before, like what is enough? How are you making sure that your studying is tailored exactly to the material, the class, the exam? Because if there is no end in sight, that can lead to this sort of hamster wheel and burnout. So I think it's really about just getting clear about like, what are your priorities? What does success look like for you? And how do you fit all this in with, the important things like sleep and social time and, all of that, that you really do need to literally survive. So we try to just be a partner to the students and ask them like, what are your goals and why are those your goals? And let's figure out how do we work backwards from those goals to where you are today and see what's actually doable and what's reasonable.
Love it. That is so awesome. Sheila, it's been great talking to you today, but if someone wanted to learn more, where would you send them?
I'd send them to our website at signeteducation.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Sheila Akbar. I always share really great content there. And, we have webinars that we do that talk about our approach. And we like to be as practical as possible, where we actually are showing people how to, define values with their kids or work through a life wheel. And we'll give them those tools because we really want everyone to know this. It's not just about us, getting more clients. I think spreading this message is really important, especially right now.
Very cool. Very cool. And so I'll have that information in the show notes. So it'll be easy to get either whether on a desktop, laptop, or mobile, because it's right there and they can easily click on it and go there. So good stuff. I got 2 questions I want to ask you before we go, and they're questions I like to ask my guests. And the first one is, Sheila, how do you keep going when so much is going on that you may want to quit?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, beyond working with students directly, I am managing a business that, we just went through COVID, and, there are a lot of challenges that we face, and we've just turned from an in-person business to a fully remote business that has its challenges as well. For me, I really believe in what we do. So I have a values-based framework, and I have a vision for my life that I'm always referencing to make sure, is this something I really need to do? Should I take this thing on or should I not? And for the company, we also have that. Actually, we have a vision document of where we want to be in 3 years, so we can stay really focused on what's important to us. So for me, that's the biggest thing is okay, what are my values? Am I able to live those in my life? And is what I'm doing today taking me towards that life that I want to live?
Very cool. I love it. Great advice. Last question. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? And what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
Yeah, I had a couple of them. I had a couple of really, really great teachers. The first one that comes to mind is my 5th grade science teacher, Mr. Corcoran, at Ward Elementary in Newton, Massachusetts. And he was just the coolest teacher I had up until that point. And he was cool not because he wore a leather jacket or rode a motorcycle or anything like that. He was cool because he just cared. And he was a real person. And he wasn't afraid to let us know. He would mention his wife sometimes in classes. And if he was teaching us about, I remember this one lesson, he was teaching us about the spectrum of light. And he did this really cool thing on the overhead projector because, yes, I went to school that many years ago. We still had overhead projectors. He did this really cool thing where he put some slides on the light and a drop of liquid, and it just made this beautiful light show. And he wasn't trying to tell us, look at that spectrum and we're going to calculate this. He was just isn't that beautiful? And he got us excited about science in a different way. I've told him this, but yeah, I thank him so much. He just changed my relationship to education.
That is so cool. Thanks for sharing that. Sheila, it was awesome talking with you today. I can't thank you enough for talking about Signet education and the challenges that students and their families face in pursuing college and navigating, life as a whole. Wish you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.